I shouldn't be alive to tell this story. The moment I felt my throat closing, I knew death was coming for me. As a critical care nurse, I've watched patients slip away countless times, but nothing prepared me for becoming the patient, trapped in my own body as it betrayed me, gasping for air that wouldn't come, watching medical professionals who should have known better miss every warning sign. But what happened next defies everything I understood about life and death. When my heart stopped and I left my body behind, I discovered that dying was just the beginning of the most profound journey I would ever take. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. I shouldn't be alive to tell this story. The moment I felt my throat closing, I knew death was coming for me. As a critical care nurse, I've watched patients slip away countless times, but nothing prepared me for becoming the patient, trapped in my own body as it betrayed me, gasping for air that wouldn't come, watching medical professionals who should have known better miss every warning sign. But what happened next defies everything I understood about life and death. When my heart stopped and I left my body behind, I discovered that dying was just the beginning of the most profound journey I would ever take. Looking back, there were warning signs. My body had been sending signals for months. The fibromyalgia flaring up with persistent pain that radiated through my muscles, the rosacea spreading across my cheeks in angry red patches. But as a nurse, I'd grown accustomed to pushing through discomfort, to treating my symptoms as inconveniences rather than harbingers. Besides, autoimmune issues are common, especially among women. Nothing to upend your life over. That morning started like any other. My daughter was home, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace in the living room, sipping a smoothie I'd blended with fresh berries. The first warning was subtle, a slight tightening in my throat as I swallowed. Within seconds, the sensation transformed from mild discomfort to unmistakable danger. My airway was constricting. My heart raced, pumping adrenaline through my veins as primal fear took hold. "Mom, are you okay?" My daughter's voice seemed to come from miles away. I couldn't answer. My lips were tingling, my tongue swelling. I recognized the symptoms instantly: anaphylaxis. But how? I hadn't eaten shellfish in years. The smoothie contained nothing I hadn't eaten 100 times before. My mind raced through possibilities even as my body began its desperate fight for oxygen. The EpiPen. I needed my EpiPen. I gestured frantically toward the kitchen drawer where I kept the auto-injector. I hadn't used it in years, had never actually needed to use it. But I always kept it nearby, a precaution that was about to become my lifeline. My hands shook violently as I pulled it from its case, removed the safety cap, and plunged the needle into my outer thigh. The familiar click, followed by the sensation of epinephrine entering my system. 10 seconds. 20. I held the injector in place, counting silently, praying for the medication to work. The constriction in my throat eased slightly, enough for me to gasp out instructions to my son who had rushed into the room. Hospital. Now. The 15-minute drive to the small community hospital was a blur of labored breathing and silent prayers. My professional mind assessed my condition even as my human mind grappled with fear. The epinephrine would buy me time, but without proper medical intervention, a second wave of anaphylaxis could kill me. And the second wave is often worse than the first. When we arrived at the emergency department, I felt a momentary surge of relief. Here, I would be safe. Here, they would know what to do. When the triage nurse approached, I recognized her immediately. We had worked together years ago. But my relief evaporated as I saw the casual, unhurried way she approached. "Penny, what brings you in today?" Her voice was conversational, as if we had met in a grocery store. I struggled to form words, each one requiring precious breath. Anaphylaxis, used EpiPen, need protocol. She glanced at my chart with a puzzled expression. "Well, if you've already given yourself the EpiPen, why did you come in?" The question sent a chill through me, unlike anything the anaphylaxis had done. Any first-year nursing student knows that after administering epinephrine for anaphylaxis, immediate medical attention is mandatory. The fact that she didn't know this was terrifying. Second wave, IV, steroids. I wheezed, stridor becoming audible in my breathing, that high-pitched sound that signals critical airway constriction. "We're a bit backed up," she said, oblivious to the advancing emergency before her. "Let's have you wait in the hallway until a room opens up." My son interjected, panic evident in his voice. "She can't breathe. She's a nurse. She says this is serious." But we were already being directed to chairs in the hallway, where I sat, fighting for each breath, watching nurses and doctors walk past without noticing the classic signs of respiratory distress I was exhibiting. The second EpiPen was in my hands now, my backup, the one you're never supposed to need. With trembling fingers, I injected myself again, knowing that if this didn't get their attention, I might not survive to try a third time. Minutes passed like hours. The stridor worsened. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I could see my son arguing with someone at the desk, his gestures becoming more frantic. Finally, a physician assistant glanced in my direction, did a double take, and rushed over. "This patient needs to be in a room now," he shouted, triggering a flurry of activity. But it was too late for precautions. I needed intervention. As they wheeled me toward a treatment room, my husband Don burst through the entrance doors, his face contorted with fear when he saw my condition. "Do something," he shouted at the medical team. "She can't breathe." The next few moments were chaos. They couldn't get an IV started. My veins had constricted from the epinephrine and shock. The doctor was discussing options, moving too slowly, too methodically for the crisis unfolding. "If you don't do something, she's going to die," Don said, his voice breaking. "You need to intubate her now." "We've got plenty of time," someone replied confidently. It was the last thing I heard before darkness closed in. My chest felt impossibly heavy, concrete-filled. My final conscious thought was remarkably calm. So this is what dying feels like. And then, with shocking suddenness, I wasn't in my body anymore. The sensation was impossible to describe, yet utterly unmistakable. One moment I was trapped inside my failing body, and the next I was elsewhere, above, separated, free. I hovered near the ceiling of the trauma room, looking down at the chaotic scene below. The medical team swarmed around a body on the gurney. My body. I watched with detached curiosity as they prepared the intubation equipment, moving with the sudden urgency that had been missing moments before. My husband stood pressed against the wall, his face contorted with fear as he watched them work. I wanted to tell him not to worry, that I felt fine now, better than fine. The crushing weight on my chest, the burning struggle for oxygen, all gone. "Who is that girl?" I thought, staring down at my motionless form. "She's really sick." It was the strangest sensation. I could see it was my body lying there, but I felt completely detached from it, as though looking at a stranger. There was no fear, no panic, just a calm, observational awareness. I watched as they tilted my head back, inserted the laryngoscope, and threaded the endotracheal tube down my throat. I observed the doctor confirm placement and hook up the ventilator. The rhythmic rise and fall of my chest seemed mechanical, artificial, because it was. I had witnessed this procedure hundreds of times as a nurse, performed it myself in emergencies. But experiencing it from this perspective was profoundly different. I wasn't anchored to my physical form anymore, yet I maintained perfect awareness of everything happening around me. The voices of the medical team sounded clear but somehow distant, like listening through water. Their movements seemed slower than they should be, as though time itself had begun to stretch and warp. I became aware of colors I'd never seen before, vibrations I could somehow perceive without hearing. The boundaries between objects seemed less defined, almost permeable. I could sense the electrical impulses in the medical equipment, feel the anxiety radiating from my husband like waves of heat, perceive the determined focus of the doctor intubating me. The room began to dim around the edges of my perception, not darkening exactly, but receding as though I was drifting away from it. I tried to move closer to Dawn, to somehow communicate that I was okay, but I couldn't control my movement in this state. Instead, I found myself pulled backward, through the wall, into a darkness that was neither frightening nor comforting. Simply vast. Time lost all meaning in this space. What might have been seconds or hours passed as I floated in nothingness. I had no sensation of my body, no heartbeat, no breath, no weight or substance. Yet my consciousness remained intact, perhaps even enhanced. I could think with remarkable clarity, remember with perfect precision. Every emotion seemed amplified, yet somehow purified. Fear existed without anxiety, sadness without depression, wonder without confusion. Then, without warning or transition, the darkness gave way to a new scene altogether. I found myself elsewhere, in a completely different environment, with no memory of traveling there. The hospital, my crisis, the medical team, all vanished in an instant, replaced by something entirely unexpected. My perception had changed fundamentally. The rigid rules of physics, time, and space that had governed my entire existence seemed suspended. I was experiencing a reality governed by different laws altogether. Not supernatural, but perhaps supernatural, beyond the limitations of our ordinary senses. Part of me, the critical care nurse, tried to rationalize what was happening. Oxygen deprivation, medication effects, the brain's final desperate activity. But that clinical voice grew fainter as my experience deepened. This felt more real, more substantial than anything I had known in my physical life. There was an authenticity to it that transcended explanation. And in that moment of suspension between worlds, I understood with perfect clarity that I was crossing a threshold few ever return from. The transition happened in an instant. One moment I was suspended in darkness, and the next, I was sitting in the back seat of my sister Karen's car. The sensation was jarring. I hadn't traveled there. I had simply appeared. Karen was driving through torrential rain, her windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Water cascaded down the windows, creating distorted patterns of light and shadow. The car's interior felt familiar, but somehow wrong. I could see everything with perfect clarity, but I couldn't feel the seat beneath me. My lower body seemed to merge with the upholstery, as though I wasn't fully present. Karen was dressed in mismatched clothes, a red sweater with purple leggings and yellow socks peeking out beneath. It was so unlike her usual coordinated style that I found myself thinking, what on earth is she wearing? She looks ridiculous. The thought formed perfectly in my mind, but when I tried to speak, no sound emerged. I knew something was deeply wrong. Karen lived in Wisconsin. I lived in Kentucky. Why was she driving through this dangerous weather instead of staying safely at home? My concern deepened as I watched her pull over at a gas station, the rain drumming on the roof. Her face was drawn with worry, eyes red from crying. What happened? I tried to ask, but she showed no sign of hearing me. I watched as she pulled out her phone and navigated to Facebook with trembling fingers. She typed a message, "Hang in there, kiddo, I'm coming." Then she set the phone down, wiped her eyes, and pulled back onto the highway. Before I could process what I'd seen, the car dissolved around me. Karen vanished. The rain, the gas station, everything, gone in an instant. I found myself plunged into absolute darkness, more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't simply an absence of light, it was a tangible void, pressing against me from all directions. The darkness had texture, weight, presence. It stretched endlessly in all directions, a limitless expanse of nothing. The oppressive quality of this place was overwhelming. Though I no longer had a physical body that needed oxygen, I found myself struggling to breathe, performing the motions out of deep-seated habit. Each imagined breath felt labored, as though the darkness itself resisted my efforts. The medical professional in me wondered if this sensation mirrored what my physical body was experiencing on the ventilator. That mechanical rhythm, the intrusion of forced air into passive lungs. Time behaved differently here. Minutes might have been months, seconds stretched into hours. Without reference points, without light or sound or sensation, my mind struggled to track the passage of time. If I had to translate this experience into earthly measurements, it felt like a decade, 10 years suspended in this void, with nothing but my thoughts for company. I began to question everything. Had I ever really lived? Were my memories of life, my children, my career, my struggles and triumphs, simply elaborate fictions I'd created to occupy myself in this eternal darkness? Perhaps this void was all there had ever been, and everything else was illusion. The thought terrified me more than death ever had. I tried to move, to escape, but motion was different here. I could sense myself making progress, dragging myself forward through the heavy darkness, but there were no landmarks to confirm I was actually going anywhere. Each effort exhausted me completely, sending me into periods of deep unconsciousness where even thought ceased to exist. When awareness returned, nothing had changed. The void remained, indifferent to my struggles. After what seemed like an eternity, I began to consider that this place might be of my own making. What if this wasn't punishment or purgatory, but something I had created? What if the darkness was a reflection of something within me? The thought came not as a revelation but as a slow, dawning realization that perhaps the spiritual space I inhabited mirrored the emotional space I had constructed in life. Since my divorce years ago, I had built walls around myself and my children. Those walls had been necessary then, protective barriers against further pain, but over time, they had become a prison. I'd stopped letting people in. I'd closed myself off to new connections, new possibilities. My life had become a predictable routine: work, children, home. Work, children, home. In protecting myself from hurt, I had also sealed myself off from joy, from growth, from the messy, vibrant fullness of life. The darkness I now floated in was the manifestation of that self-imposed isolation. I had created this void long before I died. The moment this understanding crystallized, something extraordinary happened. The darkness around me shuddered, as though struck by an unseen force. A deep rumbling vibration passed through the void, and then explosion. The blackness shattered like glass, fragments spinning away from me in all directions. Light began to penetrate the cracks, pushing the darkness further and further back. In this expanding sphere of light, I sensed a presence approaching. At first, I couldn't make out details, just an impression of brightness and warmth moving toward me. As it drew closer, I could see it was a figure. Distinctly feminine, radiating energy so vibrant and alive that it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The most striking feature was her hair, a brilliant orange-red so bright it resembled flames, little tendrils of fire dancing around her head like a living crown. I felt drawn to her, pulled by a force beyond gravity or magnetism, a recognition that transcended physical senses. As I moved closer, she opened her arms, and I found myself enveloped against her chest in an embrace that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. In that moment, I knew her. "Grandma," I whispered without sound, the communication happening directly from mind to mind. She held me as I wept, overwhelmed by relief and joy. My grandmother had died when I was in my 20s, but here she was, unmistakably herself yet transformed. Her energy circled around me, protective and nurturing, while the shards of darkness continued to spin in the distance, occasionally darting toward us only to be repelled by the force field of her love. "Calm yourself, dear one," she communicated, her thoughts flowing directly into mine. The effect of these words was extraordinary, like a powerful sedative injected directly into my consciousness. The message carried a chemical-like response that acted on every level of my being. Instantly, my distress melted away. I relaxed completely, surrendering to the safety of her presence. "Am I dead?" I asked, the question forming without words. "Oh no, no," she replied, amusement coloring her response. "You learned in science that energy can't be created or destroyed, only transformed. It's the same here. You don't die. You either live on the earth side or you're super alive on this side. It's just a transition." She explained that I was in between, neither fully in one world nor the other. "A subtle cord still connected me to my physical body," she said. "If I wanted to return, I could follow that connection back." I floated in her light, absorbing her love, feeling more peace than I had known in decades. I didn't notice when she left. Her presence simply faded as gently as it had appeared, leaving me suspended in soft radiance. Then came a sensation that defied description, a rumbling that wasn't sound, a vibration that wasn't physical. Whatever approached was vast beyond comprehension, powerful beyond measure. Every particle of my being resonated with this presence, as though the very fabric of existence trembled in recognition. Though I perceived no physical form, the energy felt distinctly masculine to me, not in appearance, but in essence. Powerful yet gentle, authoritative yet infinitely compassionate. 2 words formed in my consciousness: I am. That was all, just those 2 simple words, yet they contained volumes, universes of meaning. In those words, I recognized what humans have called by countless names throughout history: God, Creator, Source, the Divine. The vibration of this presence resonated through me in a frequency that reminded me of the musical key of D, though it transcended any earthly sound. My first reaction was fear, not of harm, but of exposure. I felt naked, transparent, every thought and deed of my life visible to this all-knowing presence. I braced myself for judgment, for the shameful moments of my life to be laid bare and examined. But judgment never came. Instead, I felt only love, unconditional, all-encompassing love that accepted every part of me, even the parts I couldn't accept myself. The presence soothed my fear, not through words, but through a wave of reassurance that washed away my anxiety. I understood that we would review my life, and I dreaded facing the mistakes, the failures, the moments of weakness I had accumulated over the years. But to my surprise, none of those came up. The things I had tortured myself with for years, the regrets that kept me awake at night, the shameful memories I couldn't forgive myself for, weren't mentioned at all. Instead, the review began with a scene I had completely forgotten. I was standing in a grocery store checkout line, watching a young mother ahead of me count out coins from her purse. She was a few dollars short, trying to decide which items to put back. Without thinking, I had stepped forward and said, "It's okay, I've got it," handing the cashier the missing amount. It was such a small gesture that I'd forgotten it almost immediately. But now I witnessed this moment from a new perspective. I saw the woman's face, the relief, the gratitude, the subtle easing of the tension she'd been carrying. And then the scene shifted forward in time, showing the same woman volunteering at a food pantry, passing on the kindness she had received, helping families in need. "I want you to see the ripple effect of every act of kindness," the presence communicated. "This is how love multiplies in the world." I was stunned. Of all the moments in my life, this was what warranted review? Not my professional achievements or failures, not my biggest decisions, but a $5 gesture I'd long forgotten. The review continued, but not in the way I expected. Rather than examining specific actions, the focus turned to something more fundamental: my thoughts about others. This struck me as strange. Surely my actions toward others mattered more than my private thoughts? "Let me explain something to you," the presence conveyed. "A thought has a certain measure of energy. A word carries more energy, and an action carries even more. But it all begins with a thought. What you think becomes what you speak, which becomes what you do. The root is always in the mind." I was shown instances where I had harbored negative thoughts about people who had hurt or disappointed me. Some of these people had genuinely wronged me. They were, as I had often thought, jerks. But I was shown something remarkable. When I held negative thoughts about these individuals, that energy didn't just stay contained within my mind. It actually extended outward, attaching itself to the person I was thinking about, reinforcing the very behavior I resented. This is why forgiveness is so important. Came the understanding, not just for your sake, but for theirs. When you forgive someone, you release that negative energy. You stop feeding the very qualities you dislike in them. This concept transformed my understanding of forgiveness. It wasn't just about letting go for my own peace of mind, though that was certainly part of it. It was about breaking a cycle of energy that bound both of us. When I refused to forgive someone, I remained connected to them through resentment. And that connection channeled energy that reinforced their negative patterns. Moreover, those same negative thoughts attached themselves to me as well. Energy attracts similar energy. By focusing on others' faults, I drew more negativity into my own experience. Even when my judgments felt justified, they harmed me as much as the person I was judging. This revelation struck me as profoundly important. Perhaps the most significant lesson of my entire experience. It wasn't about grand moral principles, but about the mechanics of how consciousness affects reality. The implications were enormous. Our thoughts aren't private after all. They reach out and touch the world around us, for better or worse. As I absorbed this understanding, something unexpected happened. A feeling I had suppressed for years suddenly surfaced. Anger. Not toward any person, but toward the divine presence itself. Years of buried resentment against God bubbled up, and in this place of perfect transparency, I couldn't hide it. "You say you're a loving God who wants the best for your children?" I challenged. I call that into question. "I've seen what you've allowed my own children to endure. Their father abandoned them when they were just babies. Watching him leave me was hard enough, but seeing my children wait by the mailbox day after day for gifts he promised, but never sent. What kind of God allows that? The raw emotion surprised me, but I couldn't stop. It would have been easier if he'd died. Then at least I could have told my children their father loved them, but couldn't be with them. Instead, they have to live with the knowledge that their father chose to leave them behind. Throughout this outburst, I felt no judgment from the presence, only patient understanding. When my anger had spent itself, the response came not as a defense or explanation, but as a scene from the future. My anger hung in the space between us, raw and honest. I had finally spoken aloud the resentment I'd carried for years, the question that had haunted me through countless sleepless nights as I comforted my heartbroken children. What kind of loving God allows children to suffer the abandonment of a parent? What divine plan could possibly justify that pain? I expected defense, perhaps even rebuke. Instead, the presence enveloped me in what I can only describe as compassionate understanding. Then, without warning, the scene around me shifted. We were sitting in metal bleachers under a bright autumn sun, watching a children's soccer game. "Where are we?" I began to ask, but then I recognized my oldest son David sitting beside me. He was older than when I'd last seen him, lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. Between us sat a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with David's eyes and his mother's smile. My grandson Cole, who had been only 2 when my crisis began. He was running on the field below us, his hair catching the sunlight as he chased the ball with fierce determination. I felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. Cole moved with the uninhibited joy that only children possess, his strong little body the perfect expression of life itself. As I watched him, David turned to me, his expression serious. "Mom," he said, "I'm never going to get through this." My heart contracted, fearing he meant some new tragedy. "I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserved," David continued, his voice steady with conviction. If it took his dad leaving for me to make that commitment, it was worth it. I was stunned by the echo of my own thoughts. Hadn't I just been raging against the abandonment? Yet here was my son, transforming that wound into purpose, breaking a cycle that might have continued for generations. The revelation struck me deeply. This wasn't just hypothetical comfort. It was a future already unfolding, a redemption story written in my son's determination to be something different, something better than what he had experienced. The very abandonment I had cursed had become the catalyst for profound change. "You have misunderstood me," the divine presence communicated. "What appears as suffering often serves purposes beyond your current understanding." As I absorbed this, the presence shared a profound insight. My understanding of good and bad had been fundamentally flawed. In my human perception, I had equated good with comfort, ease, and the absence of problems. Bad was anything that caused pain, struggle, or difficulty. But from this higher perspective, those definitions were inverted. Good wasn't the absence of challenges but forward motion, growth, development, and positive influence, regardless of how uncomfortable the process might be. A painful experience that prompted growth was good, even when it felt terrible. Conversely, stagnation was bad, even if it felt comfortable and safe. The day you sit in your recliner and stop engaging with the world, stop growing, stop affecting others, that's when you've truly lost your way, came the understanding. Even if nothing bad is happening, you're not fulfilling your purpose. This concept revolutionized my thinking. So many of my efforts had been directed toward avoiding pain, seeking comfort, and protecting myself from difficulty. Yet those very struggles I'd tried to avoid had shaped me, strengthened me, and connected me to others in profound ways. You weren't placed on earth to remain sedentary, to have no effect on the world around you, the presence continued. If that were your purpose, there would be no point in your existence. The insight expanded further, revealing something I found both comforting and challenging. Before coming into this life, we participate in choosing our circumstances. With spiritual guidance, we select the family we'll be born into and the general lessons we'll encounter. The traumas, challenges, and joys we experience aren't random accidents, but opportunities for specific kinds of growth. Before you came, you knew what difficulties you would face, I understood. You chose this life precisely because of those challenges, because they would contribute to your spiritual development in exactly the ways you needed. This didn't mean we know every detail of how our lives will unfold. We retain free will, and others exercise theirs in ways that affect us. But the broad strokes, the major themes and challenges, are selected with purpose. This perspective transformed my understanding of suffering, particularly of children. Those souls who come into lives of exceptional difficulty, born with serious disabilities, facing terminal illness, or enduring profound trauma, aren't being punished. Rather, these are often the most courageous spirits, those willing to take on the heaviest burdens for the sake of their own growth and the growth of those around them. Those children born with conditions that severely limit their abilities, the presence shared, are often souls who said, "I will come without even the ability to communicate, to show people a love that transcends speech and physical expression." It was a radical inversion of how we typically view suffering. The child with cancer isn't being punished, but is rather demonstrating extraordinary courage and teaching profound lessons about love, resilience, and what truly matters. The disabled person isn't less than others, but has often chosen a more challenging path for the sake of accelerated spiritual growth. This new framework didn't erase the reality of pain or justify cruelty. Human choices that cause harm still carry consequences. But it offered a perspective that transformed suffering from meaningless tragedy to purposeful, if difficult, experience. As I absorbed these revelations, I felt a deep sense of peace, replacing my anger. The burden of resentment I had carried for so long began to dissolve. Perhaps there was meaning in our struggles after all, not meaning imposed by a distant deity, but purpose we ourselves had recognized and chosen before we even began. As these profound realizations settled within me, I became aware of a new sensation beginning at my feet, or where my feet would have been in this formless state of being. A gentle warmth spread upward, like stepping into a hot bath after being chilled to the bone. This wasn't ordinary heat, but living light, moving with purpose and intelligence. The light began as a soft glow, then intensified as it traveled slowly upward through what I perceived as my spiritual body. As it moved, it seemed to examine every aspect of my being, pausing over areas of old hurts, both physical and emotional, before continuing its journey. Where it touched, it healed. Decades-old injuries, childhood traumas, recent sorrows, the light acknowledged each one, honored the pain they had caused, then gently dissolved the lingering damage they had left behind. When the light reached my stomach, I felt years of tension release. Stress I had carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of me. As it rose through my chest, my heart felt as though it expanded beyond its normal boundaries, capable of holding more love than I had ever imagined possible. With each area the light transformed, I felt lighter, more whole, more authentically myself. When the healing energy reached my throat, something extraordinary happened. Beautiful melodies poured forth, songs I'd never heard before, yet somehow knew perfectly. These weren't physical sounds, but expressions of pure joy, gratitude, and love that transcended language. I couldn't control this outpouring. It simply flowed through me, as natural as breathing had once been. The light continued upward, reaching my eyes. It was so brilliant I instinctively tried to close my eyes to contain it, but the radiance shot out through my eyelashes anyway. I watched in awe as beams of light extended from me into the vastness, then curved around and returned, entering through the crown of my head. I could feel it moving through the intricate pathways of my brain, illuminating every fold and recess, activating areas that had lain dormant throughout my earthly life. As the light reached what felt like the very core of my being, I made a discovery that shook me to my foundations. There, at the center of who I was, I found the same presence I had encountered externally. The divine wasn't just something out there in the cosmos, it was within me, had always been within me. "You've been here all along?" I asked in astonishment. "Not just as some external force, but actually inside me?" "I am both," came the understanding. "I exist beyond all things, but also dwell within all things. You cannot remove me from yourself any more than you could remove your father's DNA from your cells. I am not separate from you. I am the foundation of your very existence." This revelation transformed everything. God wasn't distant, wasn't watching from some remote heaven, judging human actions from afar. The divine was intrinsically interwoven with my being, closer than my own breath, more fundamental than my own thoughts. Even through all you've suffered, all your doubts and anger, I have been here, the presence conveyed, waiting for you to recognize what has always been true. As this truth settled into my awareness, I realized I was approaching a critical juncture, a decision point that would determine what happened next. The moment of decision arrived with unexpected clarity. I stood at a crossroads between worlds, fully aware of the weight of the choice before me. Part of me longed to stay in this realm of pure love and understanding, where pain didn't exist and truth was as visible as light. The thought of returning to the limitations of physical existence, to suffering, to misunderstanding, to the heaviness of a body that could feel pain and exhaustion, filled me with a profound reluctance. Yet there was something unfinished about my earthly journey. I sensed that I hadn't completed what I had come to do. The realization came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet certainty. I had veered off course from my original purpose. In building walls to protect myself after my divorce, in narrowing my life to the safe and predictable, I had abandoned the path I had chosen before birth. "You haven't lived the life you were meant to live," came the gentle understanding. "Not even close. You've avoided the very experiences you came to embrace." This wasn't said with judgment, but with compassionate truth. I had indeed played it safe, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding the messiness of deep connection with others. My professional life as a nurse had been fulfilling, but in my personal life, I had chosen isolation over risk, comfort over growth. The decision seemed to exist outside of time. In one sense, it felt as though I deliberated for eons, weighing all possibilities. In another sense, it felt predetermined, as though I had always known I would choose to return, had perhaps made this decision long before my birth into this life. As I made my choice, I was overcome with a profound grief. Leaving this place of perfect love and understanding felt like an exile, a banishment from paradise. Tears flowed as I prepared to depart, to follow that silver cord back to my damaged body, to the limitations of physical existence, to a world where the truths I now understood with such clarity would become again like half-remembered dreams. "Let me remember," I pleaded. "If I can't remember this, I don't think I'll have any hope." The response came not as words, but as a promise. I would retain enough to sustain me, enough to guide me back to my authentic path. The transition back was not gradual, but instantaneous. One moment, I was immersed in limitless light and love, and the next, I was confined within the familiar boundaries of my body. A body now racked with pain, a throat raw from the tube that had been removed, muscles weak from disuse. I opened my eyes to see my sister Karen standing beside my hospital bed, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. She wore the same mismatched clothes I had seen her in during my journey, the red sweater and purple leggings that had seemed so out of character. The realization that this detail had been real, not imagined, sent a jolt through me. "I was with God," I said immediately, my voice a raspy whisper. The words emerged before I could consider their impact, before I could filter my experience through the lens of what others might find acceptable or believable. Karen's eyes widened, but before she could respond, a nurse entered the room. She checked my vitals, her professional demeanor masking her surprise at finding me conscious and speaking. "She's awake. I'll page the doctor," she said, her tone clipped and efficient. Within minutes, a doctor arrived, followed by a procession of medical staff. They fired questions at me, testing my orientation, my memory, my neurological function. I answered mechanically, distracted by the vivid recall of my experience, which felt more real than the hospital room around me. "Do you know what happened to you?" the doctor asked. "I had anaphylaxis. I stopped breathing." "You had to intubate me," I replied. "That's right," he confirmed, looking faintly surprised at my clarity. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days. The equivalent of 10 years in that endless void, followed by my encounter with the divine. Time truly was different on the other side. When the medical team had completed their assessment, my husband Don was allowed into the room. He rushed to my bedside, his face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "You're back," he said, gripping my hand as though afraid I might slip away again. "I thought I'd lost you." "I saw things, Don," I whispered. "I was somewhere else. I was with God." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "It's okay. You don't have to talk about it now. Your brain was without oxygen for a while. The doctor said you might have some unusual thoughts. I fell silent, realizing for the first time that sharing my experience wouldn't be as simple as relating a dream or describing a trip. What had happened to me existed outside the framework of ordinary understanding. How could I possibly convey the profound truths I had glimpsed on the other side? What surprised me most in the weeks following my return wasn't the skepticism from medical professionals. I had expected that. As a nurse, I understood how the scientific mind approaches experiences that defy conventional explanation. When the hospital psychologist was called to evaluate me at St. Joseph Catholic Hospital, a place named for a saint who reportedly communicated with the divine, the irony wasn't lost on me. They documented my account as post-anoxic delusions in my medical chart, a label that would follow me through the healthcare system. No, what truly surprised me was the reaction from my religious friends and community. I had naively assumed that people of faith would embrace my experience, would welcome confirmation of the spiritual realities they professed to believe in. Instead, I encountered resistance, sometimes even hostility. If you were really a Christian, one church friend told me, you would have gone straight to heaven. You wouldn't have been in some void or talking with God directly. Where was Jesus in your story? Others questioned specific theological elements of my experience, measuring it against doctrinal expectations rather than considering it on its own terms. The divine presence I encountered didn't fit neatly into denominational boxes. The lessons I learned weren't direct quotes from Scripture, though they certainly didn't contradict its essence of love and forgiveness. After months of such conversations, I began to understand the source of their discomfort. A near-death experience threatens the carefully constructed frameworks we build around the mystery of existence. For religious people, it can challenge specific interpretations they've been taught are absolute. For secular people, it raises questions about reality that materialist philosophy struggles to address. A near-death experience is not a death experience, I would explain to those willing to listen. I believe God tailors these glimpses to what each individual needs to learn to overcome what's hindering them in life. It's not the same as the final transition we make when we truly cross over. This perspective helped some understand why my experience might differ from their expectations of the afterlife. I wasn't given the full tour of eternity, just a brief, personalized visit designed to help me correct my course in life. The most compelling evidence of my experience's reality came from my sister Karen. When I described seeing her in her car during the storm, wearing mismatched clothes, pulling over at a gas station, and typing, "Hang there, kiddo, I'm coming," on Facebook, her face went pale. "How could you possibly know that?" she asked. "I was alone on that highway. No one saw me." She confirmed every detail. The torrential rain that had made driving dangerous, the uncharacteristic outfit she had thrown on in her panic after receiving the call about my condition, the exact words of her Facebook message. These were verifiable facts I could not have known through any conventional means, details no oxygen-deprived hallucination could have manufactured. This verification serves as my anchor when doubt creeps in, when the mundane concerns of daily life threaten to overshadow the profound truths I glimpsed on the other side. Sometimes the experience feels distant, like a dream fading in the harsh light of day. But then I remember Karen's face when I recounted details only she could have known, and I'm grounded again in the certainty that what I experienced was real. My journey has taught me that the boundary between life and death is not the sharp line we imagine, but a permeable membrane. And the greatest revelation, that the divine dwells not only beyond us but within us, remains the compass by which I now navigate my returned life, with all its renewed purpose and deeper understanding. Have you ever wondered what waits beyond that final breath? As someone who has walked to the edge and returned, I can tell you, it's not what any of us imagined. The divine isn't waiting in judgment, it's waiting in love. Your deepest regrets, the mistakes that keep you awake at night, they're not what matter most. What echoes into eternity are the moments of kindness you've forgotten. The $5 you gave a struggling mother at the grocery store, the encouraging word to a colleague having a rough day. Your thoughts about others aren't private. They're energy that affects both them and you. Every judgment, every resentment creates bonds that hold both of you back. Forgiveness isn't just for your peace of mind. It liberates everyone involved. And that suffering you can't make sense of? Perhaps it's not random cruelty, but part of a journey you chose before arriving here. A path to growth that your higher self recognized as necessary. Most profound of all, that divine presence isn't just out there somewhere. It's woven into the very fabric of who you are, waiting to be recognized. You've never been alone, even in your darkest moments. Death isn't the end. It's just a transition to being super alive, in ways our limited minds can barely comprehend. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.